Hello and welcome back to Crushing Comics, the show where I fall in love with my comic collection all over again. Let's pull another one down from the shelf. I think we should keep chipping away at this one up here. Wow, that's happening. Oh boy. So, let's see, what shall we talk about today? I think that something that's really interesting is the mainstreaming of nerd culture, just eternally, right? But especially in the last 10 or 15 years. When we first got to Wellington, we had dinner with a few of the other families who came to Wellington in the program that we came in. And we were just talking about the kind of media we like. Of course, we talked about Lord of the Rings because almost all of it was shot here in New Zealand. But we were talking about Marvel movies, and everybody was like, I love those! And then I was like, show of hands, has anybody ever read a comic book? And nobody had. And I think it's great that what we think as superheroes and comic book media is now available to such a wide audience, wider than it ever was before. And that's great. But there's also this idea of, like, when I say I'm a comic book fan, I'm a comic book fan of the comic books. I incidentally like the media. Sometimes I don't like it. But my fandom is based on a different thing. I don't subscribe to this idea that there are true fans. Like, that doesn't make me a better fan than the people that raised their hands and said they liked the movies. But it's different. And my nerd thing that I liked is now available to so many other people, and that's awesome. But it just tracks the evolution of something that once was niche or contained to a community and then has become more widely available. And that's happened through time, right? Like because a lot of technology and innovation, a lot of things that are cool, they have to start somewhere. Some group of influencers have to like them first, generally, before the thing gets big. So there's always some fan who's like, I was a fan of it before XYZ. But I just think comics are interesting and different than that because they are something that, it's not like they were incubated for just a little bit of time. Comic books have been around since the 1930s. And here we are in the 2000s with these comic book movies like just starting to become a thing, with the release of like Spider-Man and X-Men in the early 2000s, because Batman in the 90s was kind of a different era. And part of it was just that technology got to the point that you could do these superhero movies the way they deserve to be done. I mean, that first X-Men movie is a little bit pokey to begin with. I mean, Sabretooth, it's a little pokey. But could you imagine them trying to do that X-Men movie even 5 years before that? Like, it was never going to happen. Just now, in the last, 6 years, I feel like comic book movies are finally, having the full scope that you've always wanted to see these characters and adventures in. Let's see what we pulled today. Oh, wow. This is a really interesting batch. Okay. I guess we're going to start with this one. Here we go. This is called Squadron Supreme. It is a very interesting Marvel comic book. There are actually 2 Squadron Supreme omnibuses, and it's important to understand the difference. This Squadron Supreme omnibus just has Squadron Supreme 1 through 12, an issue of Captain America, and a Squadron Supreme, God, that's hard to say a lot of times, Squadron Supreme, and a Squadron Supreme original graphic novel. There's another one, which probably would be my recommendation to pick up at this point, that's like the complete everything Squadron Supreme. It has all of this omnibus in it. It's the only time to date that Marvel has duplicated a whole omnibus of content in another omnibus. And it also has all of their other appearances from around this time all the way up through, I think, the late 90s or early 2000s. Squadron Supreme is this interesting thing that I feel like DC really did more than Marvel. The whole history of DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths started with the Justice League series in the 1960s because DC had this concept that its Golden Age heroes were like a different set of heroes, and they started to bring them back as being from a different Earth and interacting with the Justice League in the Silver Age in the 1960s series. And so DC tended to coin a group of characters that were in another universe and then have them kind of go and do their own thing or bring them into the main universe, and that was more of a DC thing. Marvel has always been so intent on their own universe that I just don't feel like Marvel has done that as much until time travel really became a thing with X-Men in the 80s, and then that started to fuel a lot of the from the future cross-universe thing. And then, of course, Marvel had a whole sideline universe, Ultimate Universe. I tell that story because Squadron Supreme is an example of Marvel kind of doing the thing that DC was known for, which was that they kind of showed this super team that was from a parallel place to here, and then played that out in their own series and let it kind of be their own thing. And if you notice, they definitely are a little bit of a takeoff on DC. Both DC and Marvel likes to do this, but I think Marvel does it more than DC because DC is a much more iconic set of heroes at its core. And so Marvel, whenever they're kind of like parodying a team or doing an alternate universe team, because Marvel doesn't really have like a Superman character, Marvel tends to be like, oh, here's the Superman. And Marvel doesn't really have a Wonder Woman character, and so there tends to be like, oh, here's the Wonder Woman. And they just can't help themselves. Whereas like, what is DC going to do that like will be as on point in terms of parodying Marvel? I guess you could have somebody who's super patriotic like Captain America. You could have somebody who's some kind of bug, although DC has other bug characters like Spider-Man, but they aren't exactly quite as iconic as the main DC heroes. So this, clearly I've never read it. It's still in the plastic. I got it because it was on Blowout. This was like being totally liquidated after having been liquidated several times. I think I got it for like $20. And it just seemed like something cool and historic to have on my shelf that hopefully one day I will eventually read. Do I wish that I had the other version? Not really, because you know what? I don't know that I need like every comprehensive Squadron Supreme story ever. Like, I dig that they went on and got used even more in the future, but this is what Mark Gruenwald originally intended for them, and I'm very happy to just read that and have it be contained. I probably own a lot of the other issues they've been in other collections. I don't need them like slapdash in a book just so I can read them in order. Let's see what's next. So this book is really, really interesting. Actually, these two books kind of go together, which is why they were on the shelf. Not together, but similar themes. So one is Fantastics for World's Greatest Comics magazine, and the other one is Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. These have in common that they are inserting retroactive continuity stories into the past, but they're doing them in very different ways. So the World's Greatest Comics magazine book is a rotating cast of creators over the course of 12 issues, basically extending the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby Fantastic Four run. It was historic. It went until Fantastic Four, I believe, 104, and it's really one of the best, creator pairings and runs in history, and it's historic, and they establish not only so much of the Fantastic Four's history, but so much of Marvel's history in the run. And so these are modern creators playing in that run. The back cover says it's all between Fantastic Four issues 100 and 101. And a lot of things were happening in that period as Stan Lee and Kirby were finishing out their run, and this just like extends that. So it has the Fantastic Four interacting with a lot of the other Marvel Universe, X-Men, Captain America, Daredevil, Spider-Man, and the stories themselves are kind of more in the classic Marvel way, and even though there are some modern artists working on them, they are all drawn in a very homage-y kind of way. So it's really kind of like oh wow, I've never seen that before. Check this out. This is one of the coolest debosses I've ever seen in a Marvel comic book. They're never that intricate. That is really, really cool. So this is really neat if you're a Fantastic Four fan, especially if you have the Fantastic Four omnibuses. This is cheap, like it wasn't a big hit. Grab it and put it on the shelf next to them. It's like a fun modern extension of that run, and it fits, pretty much right after the third omnibus-ish. There's like another 10 issues in between. So this other book was a book that Marvel did two of these series. One that was Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, one that was Spider-Man and X-Men, which will open at some point. And it was a neat concept. It was both of the series was by Christos Gage, and it took the team through 4 distinct historical periods and showed a retroactive story of Spider-Man interacting with them, and then also was playing out a modern story too, along with that. And this is fun because of the periods it taps into. If you see here on the cover, this is that famous Fantastic Four replacement team of Spider-Man, Ghost Rider, Wolverine, and Hulk that happened a little bit, I think, in the 340s for Fantastic Four. So clearly it plays in that period, and then it goes all the way up to present day. Fantastic Four and Spider-Man are always a really great match. They're kind of like a fun Marvel, like not peanut butter and jelly, but maybe like peanut butter and marshmallow fluff. It's really a lot of fun to read them together, and Spider-Man, of course, has been an actual member of the Fantastic Four, and because he has such a long-running relationship with Johnny Storm as the Human Torch, and as we saw unwrapping a book previously, even have had a mini-series together, right? Here we go. They really blend well on the page, and Spider-Man weighs the team a little bit more to that youthful glib part of it, because Sue Storm is not youthful and glib. The Thing is like the curmudgeon. Reed is written as very old. So when you add Spider-Man, it kind of really shifts the scales of the Fantastic Four. So I guess the whole theme of this chunk when I wasn't wrapping these thinking like there's going to be an internet show and there's going to be themes to every episode, but I guess this theme kind of is retroactive continuity. So here's Wolverine Origin 1 and 2. Oh boy, so gosh, this almost merits its own episode, but I'm going to give it a try here. So Wolverine's origin had never been totally established. Marvel had hinted at it on many occasions, and including starting with Barry Windsor Smith's Weapon X run and Marvel Comics Presents, but also just with like a whole rush of hints about Wolverine's kind of pre-lost memory life, and they'd never really put down stakes. They told a few stories that were meant to be definitively before Wolverine got his adamantium, but they never really told any stories of early Wolverine. These were always like Wolverine kind of in like a World War II or, you know, Korean War era, interacting with some Marvel characters who maybe had met him once or twice, but never early Wolverine. And so Origin changed all of that. And Origin said, let's get ahead of it and tell the story. Maybe that was because there was the threat of it being told in film and Marvel didn't have control of the Fox films, and so it was like, we better tell something before Fox has the chance to tell a version. But, you know, this need for comic books to, like, uncloak every mystery now in the modern age, I think, like, totally is contrary to the way comic books operated previously, where sometimes mysteries were just mysteries. Like, sometimes you were never meant to find out the truth. Who was the other Summers brother? What was Wolverine's early history? Like, it wasn't important to know. The mystery drove the plot. But now I think there's much more of a sense of, like, tell us everything. And fans online get angry if there's, like, a mystery that runs for, like, a year now, which is why there aren't long-running mysteries anymore in comic books. Imagine that. So this tells a very non-Wolverine story. Like, don't buy it and think you're going to see a lot of hack and slash. It tells the story of him as a child. And it gives you a little bit of clarity not only about his life, but his mutant powers and which powers are really his. Of course, if we think back to the iconic X-Men 25, when Magneto strips the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton, and we discover there's bone claws underneath. And I remember reading that comic at the time being like, whoa, did the claws just grow into the adamantium, or were they there the whole time? And that's a story that continues and is, in a way, resolved by this, because we finally get the explanation. So, years later, Kieran Gillen was paired with Adam Kubert to do a second one, which is funny because the first one was by his brother, Andy Kubert, who's actually my preferred Kubert brother. And Gillen fast forwards a little bit to a Wolverine who's now been kind of living in the wild for a while, and is literally kind of raised by wolves, and shows one of his interactions with society, also plays with some early Mr. Sinister and Sabretooth. Sabretooth, of course, is at a point was implied to be Wolverine's father. That's clearly not the case, as finally made clear by this, but there's definitely this idea that the two of them have associated with each other for a really long time. Oh my gosh, collapse! No, just the fountain slipping down a little bit. Wow, I thought our lives were at stake for a second there. So, you know, I've read the first one a long time ago. I read this one as it was coming out. Here's the thing. They're nice. If you're really interested in reading some Wolverine stuff from before he was Wolverine, if the Wolverine Origins movie seemed ridiculous as it is to you, but you're like, wow, I wish I actually knew more about Wolverine's origins, read them. But I don't know you need to rush out and get them. There's actually, I think, the Marvel released, or is about to release, the two of them together in a single trade paperback, and that's a handy way to do it, because they're 2 6-issue series, and you can just get them all in one book. But it's not, here's the thing, it's not crucial to read those to understand Wolverine. Wolverine, of course, got all of his memories back as a result of House of M, and so the modern Wolverine remembers all of that stuff. But it's not like they're always like, oh, remember when Wolverine was 6 in every story, and then like footnote, hey, do you remember that from the Origins? I think a few authors have referenced it. Aaron kind of played with it a little bit at points in his Wolverine and Astonishing Spider-Man and Wolverine, and also in Wolverine and X-Men, but it's not required reading. So, nor is it even one of my top picks for reading of Wolverine. So here's our weird little retroactive continuity and alternate universe bundle, headed for its ceremonial shelving. We'll use it to make sure there's no more collapses from the fountain to freak me out in the middle of episodes. Ugh. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of Crushing Comics. Tune in next time as I continue to explore what's in my collection, some of which I've apparently forgotten about entirely. I probably could have never told you that we were going to be unwrapping a Squadron Supreme book, but here we are in Wellington, New Zealand, unwrapping that book. Thank you so much for watching Crushing Comics.